Welcome to another episode of Recovery on Screen, the show where we look into all of the great films about addiction recovery that give people inspiration, hope, knowledge, and a perspective about addiction recovery, especially their own recovery from addiction. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the great films about addiction recovery, definitely in the pantheon of the top 5 that everybody always talks about. And that movie is Clean and Sober. We're going to get into that with one of my new best friends and colleagues who's an expert on this and an expert in recovery as well. We'll get right to that right after this.
You took the money, didn't you?
It's real complicated.
We're talking about embezzlement here.
You guys know how many properties I sold last quarter? 23 properties.
Please tell security
Me!
that Mr. Bond
By myself, for you, man!
Are you an addict, Daryl?
You don't even know you got a problem.
I just want to make sure I understand the deal as far as the confidentiality aspect is concerned.
21-day program which begins during detox. I'll examine you, see what chemicals you've been using, prescribe medication.
Oh, great. Is that what I'm going to look like tomorrow?
Sleeping alone starts to get you down. Sometimes. I just know how tough it can be to have to sleep alone.
I'll bet you do. Daryl, I've been through a lot.
You attracted to me?
Yeah.
You haven't been through nothing yet.
I want you out of here.
Fine! You want me out of here? I'm out of here! I'm gone!
I've been to about 9 million job interviews. I'm $52,000 in debt. And I got this chip. God knows what we got going next month.
Hey, welcome back, and I am so happy to talk about one of my favorite films about addiction and recovery, Clean and Sober. And for that, I'm joined by Jason LaChance, who is the wonderful podcaster of Knocking Down Doors and KDT Media. And I was just happy to be on one of his recent shows. And he mentioned that one of his favorite films about addiction and recovery was Clean and Sober. And it is definitely one of mine as well. So I thought we'd talk it all out. Jason, thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Of course, it's fun to hang out with one of my new best friends and talk film. Two things I love: good people and good films.
And also, you know what? You're doing a wonderful job of co-branding with me right now because, and I'll show you.
All right.
You're wearing the exact colors of the Recovery Movie Meetups workbook.
I planned that out.
You did. That was intentional. All right. Well, listen, let's dive into it. Before we start, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and KDD Media, Knocking Down Doors. Give me the elevator pitch before we launch into the film.
Sure. I've been hosting Knocking Doors Down we are in the 4th season, talking with celebrities, experts, everyday people who have turned their greatest adversities into their greatest advantages, primarily in the area of addiction recovery. We do touch on some mental health and trauma aspects as well with certain people. And yeah, I've been doing that, like I said, in the 4th season. I also work for a nonprofit called Parents and Addicts in Need. We're really tackling the fentanyl crisis, helping parents and the families reconnect with the child addict. So yeah, a lot of work that I'm blessed by my higher power to do. And yet some days I look up and go, are you sure I can keep going? It can get heavy at times, but it's beyond rewarding.
That's awesome. I mean, to do something like that, that is really a fantastic service. And what a great area to be working in. I'm sure they need the support. Well, today, Clean and Sober, really a remarkable film. I write about it in the book Addicted in Film, which I know many people who watch this YouTube series have read. It was one of my favorite chapters to write, chapter 15. Seriously, I can stop anytime I want. And there is a wonderful picture of Michael Keaton. Now, tell me, Jason, why, there's a lot of reasons why this movie is very important, which we can touch on later, but tell me why this spoke to you and where you were in your own recovery at the time that it made the most impact.
Ironically, it's twofold, Ted. My dad had primarily meth addiction, and when I was a kid, I realized I was getting a lot of material that was helping me, like, Winnie the Pooh's Don't Talk to Strangers and these kind of things. And then about 12, this movie found its way in our house. And I think it was a way of my mom trying to help me understand things she didn't know how to communicate. And, it was a lot of aha moments, especially with the erratic, irrational behavior, that we can all relate to. And then ironically, I think in an effort to understand my dad and through my own alcoholism and recovery, I had purchased this movie and I didn't even remember. And when I was in my first go round of sobriety, I found it in boxes when I had moved into my new home after my divorce and put it on, and it struck even more of a chord. There was an ironic thing when I was going back to IMDb to make sure I was refreshed. In one of the notes, there was a guy where he said, this movie references 12-step work accurately, but, the gentleman, God, why am I drawing a blank? His sponsor, M. Emmerich Walsh. Yeah. Has him kind of working his 4-step and said, bring that list to me. And guy on the IMDb said a sponsor would never do that. And I went, BS, that's exactly what my first sponsor did. He wanted me to recognize and to own that I had a problem by realizing how many people I hurt first and foremost. And that helped me then step one of acknowledging I am powerless against this, this disease. So, for me, it was, there was a lot of familiarity there, the telling of the stories, Everett Walsh, when he's talking about, the insanity where he's banging after he broke his nose and he's cracking it back with a hammer to straighten it out. And it's like, this is my life, and so I can resonate with a lot of experiences like that.
Yeah, it's a good one. And I think one of the most powerful scenes in the movie remains the beginning, really, with M. Emmett Walsh is giving a monologue. He's giving a speech to his AA meeting. And he says something which is so true, which is you just never lose interest. And that's something that's sort of like a warning, but also sort of like something to internalize that sort of sets the stage for the rest of the film. Now, in the film, Michael Keaton, who was sort of like known as like Mr. Funny Man, he was like the Jim Carrey of his time. And for him to do a really serious role like this was a real stretch. And, the movie almost didn't get made. And the only reason, I think one of the only reasons it did get made was that Ron Howard had just formed a company called Imagine Entertainment. They'd got public and they had a deal over Universal. And but they decided to make a movie for Columbia. And one of the interesting things about it was that they were able to sort of self-finance this film. And their big hits were still like a couple of years off, like Apollo 13 and some of these big films that they did at Universal, which I actually coincidentally had the pleasure of working on with Ron Howard. And I worked with him in the marketing department on Apollo 13 and several other of his big movies. He's just a delightful, absolutely delightful person. But, it was a stretch that they made this movie at all. And Glenn Gordon Caron, who was the director, was really not known as a film director. He was a TV guy who had done Moonlighting. So he was the guy who was basically responsible for discovering Bruce Willis. And so, to make the movie was a stretch, but they did. And, it really paid off for Michael Keaton because it sort of established him as somebody who could do a whole range of things. And then, of course, then what happened was I'm Batman. And that sort of launched him into a whole other area of movie history. But it's interesting how years later, he came back and won an Emmy for the movie about the opioid crisis.
Oh, Dope Sick. Yeah.
Dope Sick, which is amazing. And, his acceptance speech. So it was like very emotional. But, describe for our audience, like how you may have identified with the Daryl Pointer character at the beginning. Very much like in denial, very much like phoning it in recovery.
Yeah, I think it's when, and I'm blanking on the actor, help me here, Ted, when he goes to his friend's house and he's talking with him, and you can see that his friend's wife is kind of like, what is Daryl doing here again? Get rid of him. And he says to him, when he pretty much gets rejected, hey, can I have another beer? And it's, I mean, I can flash back to as I've talked about my dealers, being I'm an alcoholic, it works a little bit different than maybe, different drugs. Oftentimes was my neighbors. And there was a point where I remember one next door neighbor where the wife was like, yeah, it's time to wrap this up. You need to go home. And, so that's very, yeah, boy, I haven't thought about that in a long time, but yeah, it just mirrored a lot of that behavior, the financial ruin that Daryl is in. Granted, I didn't embezzle any money, but I certainly, was borrowing money to make it to payday, and counting change so I could at least buy whatever had the most alcohol in it at the cheapest price. So I definitely went through financial ruin, and I mean, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and here I am scrounging for change to make sure I at least get a fix that night. So yeah, I can relate to a lot of Daryl in this movie.
Yeah, and then also I think that something that I think many people can kind of relate to, and this is sort of like a common trope, and you see this in 28 Days and several other movies about the recovery experience, including A Million Little Pieces and other films that cover the rehab sort of story, is that when he first get in there, he's kind of phoning it in. He's trying to get the number. He's fighting with Morgan Friedman, the guy who runs the place. And he's sort of like, he's trying to bend, he's in the meetings, but he's not really participating. He's trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. Then he's back. So did you have a similar experience where when you went to rehab, that you kind of like just were too cool for school, like Daryl was and Michael Keaton was in this film?
I don't think we discussed. Wasn't able to do rehab. I was the sole provider for the family. Okay. So for me, a lot of it was white knuckle. Then a loved one, a gentleman who's one of my first pastors in adulthood. Choosingly, he's like, "I'll take you to your first meeting." So, cool. He kind of reminds me a lot. He's not in recovery, but he had that love and grace of M. Emmerich Walsh's character. Richard Dirks. Yeah. And so I had that, but I definitely did have a lot of kind of that attitude of like, oh, what does this old person know? They're just looking for some solution, some sort of cure. And it's like, I don't have a problem. I definitely was like, I can monitor this. Like, it's no big deal. So I did have a bit of a cockiness. And I know in reflection, it was out of fear that was so much of my identity at that time, like, why am I going to let it go for you, old man?
Right. And absolutely right. Yeah, I guess you don't really have to have been in formal rehab to have that too cool for school mentality. And a lot of people, I didn't go to rehab either. And there were times when I was just like, you know what, I've got this. Rehab and all that other stuff is for other people. I'm special. I could do it myself. And, over time, I realized I couldn't do it myself. I needed help. I needed to reach out. I needed to go to meetings. I needed to form a network, a dream team of people around me, an A-list. And that's what eventually worked out. And that's, I think, which was a good message about the film, is that he learns that the power of, community. And one of the unique things about the film is that he's out of rehab by the second act, by the beginning of the second act. And really the story is how he restructures or tries or struggles to restructure his life when he gets out. And there's moments when he's just like sitting in his apartment and he ran out of things to watch on TV, and he's looking at his kitchen and he's looking at his cabinets and he's already raided the fridge. What does he do? When I saw those scenes, I'm like, oh my God, I can totally understand what he's going through right now. There's like, the clock is ticking so slowly. Did you find that you had like the same sort of experience?
Oh my gosh, yeah, we have so much time on our hands, right? We have yet to realize how much time we wasted daily in our addiction, either the pursuit of or the use of. Very much so, that's why I think we had talked about this separately, that one of my first sponsors, like, what do you love to do when you were a kid? And it was like, oh, play with G.I. Joes, draw, build Legos. He's like, boom, bought me a gift card. You're going to start building Legos again. And
Yeah.
and and it's funny now, my partner, she'll laugh. Like, I can get a set that should take someone a week to build and I can knock it out in about 4 or 5 hours, but it put my hands back to use, got my, you have to focus. You have to get out of your, whatever thoughts it is and really focus. So for me, I can relate to that, the organizing of the garage and all these different things, just to kind of start to clean up your life. I mean, I was a mess, just like Daryl, stuff all over the place, nothing organized. It's, it's
Yeah.
that byproduct that's all too familiar.
Yeah. And then so the funny scene when Emma Walsh is like vacuuming his drawers just to make sure that every little possible granular piece of cocaine or anything else is out of there.
That's right.
And then, I really thought that the Morgan Freeman, this is before Morgan Freeman was Morgan Freeman, but, he's got these smaller parts that led to a bigger career. But he is, what do you think of his character? He's such just a sweet guy, but he's sort of like, to me, he's sort of reflective of just how difficult it is for people in facilities and treatment facilities. And your heart goes out to them, that they're just getting whacked around all day long and they're just trying to help people. And they have to deal with assholes like Daryl. What did you think of his character? Did that resonate with you in terms of like people in your life that helped you along, that just you thought, my God, this guy is completely selfless, or this woman is completely selfless? How do they do it? I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I think his character for me would resonate most similarly, word I can't enunciate today, with my dad. My dad, then being in recovery, was pretty quick to cut off my BS, because he heard it all. He had been through it all. He had done 4 rehabs, he'd been to Betty Ford and he had been the too cool for school. And so, Morgan Freeman's character, Craig, is brilliant in that he's got all the boundary tools. Like, you're not going to BS him. And I see that now with old timers in a lot of, and I mean that respectfully, longevity, 30, 40 years of sobriety, that you come in and there's a newbie trying to, throw some bull their way, and they can just shut it down real quick. And they do it with love, but it's like solid boundaries where you're just like, wow, you are awesome. Like, I still yet to have that kind of strength to go, no, this is where my empathy ends and you start. And I mean, think about all the personalities Craig was dealing with. It wasn't just Daryl. He had one lady that was kind of the femme fatale in there, that used her sexuality to get her drugs. The one gentleman that was a crack addict, that extreme anger issues, and just really intense. And so there's such that spectrum of people that were in there, and somehow, he's like, I have to do what I do to navigate all these people. Otherwise, it's going to destroy me. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a little bit like in a different form of Steve Buscemi in 28 Days.
Yes.
And what's the actor who was in A Million Little Pieces? Billy Bob Thornton, who's sort of like that, that overarching, kind, incredibly patient person. I think everybody in recovery, or most people in recovery, have had an individual like that just completely, you really, really throw the kitchen sink at them, and they rebound. They're still there to help, which is great. Thank gosh that we have people like that. Now, tell me, before we leave, why don't you tell the audience what your favorite, most powerful, transformative scene of the movie was, that you and what you want to tell our audience of, like, why you think they should go back, see the movie, and why they should focus on this particular scene.
Can I pick 2?
Please. Yes.
Okay. I would have to say when Daryl is first going to meetings looking for sponsors, and he's seeking out the female sponsors really quick. And hey, I've worked with females, not full on sponsee, but you can see that it's the other solution that he's looking for. If I can't get my fix from a drug, I'm going to get my fix from a person. When he got the big issue really hit, he's with a lady that overdoses. They're doing blow. He doesn't really know her that well. And that's, I mean, how represent, that's us addicts, the bedfellows we keep. So for me, that was really impactful. Not so much that I personally did that, but I've been at meetings before where there's a newcomer female and a newcomer guy, and I'll go up and warn the women there, like, you can automatically see the guy, his eyes are zooming the room. And there was I was at a meeting actually in San Diego, and I go up to this young lady and I go, hey, there's a new guy here. I mean, I know you've never met me, but be careful. He's going to come up and talk to you. And she's like, okay, thanks. And sure, you know what? When that meeting ended, he beelined right for her, and she looks at me and just goes, how did you know? I'm like, hey, I can smell my kind.
Yeah.
And then the other one is really the very end of the movie. Daryl has lost a lot. He's just, he's gone through so much hurt at this point, rebuilding his life, having to own everything he did, the embezzlement stuff, the loss of someone else he was in rehab with, and really developed real genuine feelings, not the chemical feelings, not that this is my, fellow addict. And he's up there and he's given his speech, and it's just so heartfelt and real and genuine, and I cry every time I see that scene. And then the great closer where he goes, when you could smoke indoors, and thank you for not smoking because the room is so smoke filled. And I mean, everybody I do 12-step work with, unfortunately I've downgraded to nicotine pouches, but everybody's there smoking outside. And so it's just so real. And it's just like, oh yeah, I've been in that room. I know that room. I've seen that desperation. I've seen that person that is just feeling all the feels, but they're holding up that chip, like, but I got 30 days,
It's a wonderful ending to a great film. And I'll tell you, my my most heartbreaking episode, it's not my favorite episode, but the one that really kind of moves me the most or affected me was when he's on the phone and he's trying to convince his mother to sell her house or get a second mortgage, and I'm just thinking to myself, God, how many millions of times have people like, not that I ever did that because my mother had already passed away, but where, they're trying to go to people who love them and want to support them and want to help them, and also get wiped out by somebody's addiction. Because, Daryl had no intention of paying his mother back, and it would have been just ruinous if she had decided. But and she's not even a character in the movie. You just hear her on the phone, and you don't see her, but you can just imagine the sort of like the torture that somebody's addiction wreaks on somebody else. And so I thought that was a pretty impressive scene as well. So sad.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of that one as well. It's and I can relate to it in the fact, again, like referring back to my dad knowing to set those boundaries, knowing and hearing these things. And, when I had to with my DUI, and I think it ended up costing me between $6,000 and $10,000. I don't even remember by the time the court fees and fines and the classes and everything else that, and he's like, well, you're going to find a way to pay that. It wasn't even well, son, if you need a little help, you're going to find a way. And it was, boy, it kept me out of trouble, taking weekend jobs and all kinds of stuff. So, so much of this movie is just relatable that anyone through the recovery process, or if you have a loved one going through it, you can sit and watch, and it kind of helps you step inside and understand this disease of addiction a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that, Jason. I mean, I think I agree. I think, it was great to have you on the show to sort of explain that really it is a very important film. If anybody who's watching this is struggling, right now, watch this film, seek out treatment, get help. Don't just watch the movie. That's not going to help you. You need to do a bunch of different things. But, this movie is sort of like a great example of a success story. And these kinds of success stories happen in recovery every day. In fact, they're more the norm than not. We like to think that people fail at the recovery or relapse. So we look at statistics, and you know what? Sometimes the rates of recovery, or the success rates of AA or SMART or anything else, they're all debatable. But the main thing is we're all trying. Everybody is trying, and the story of Daryl and Clean Clean and Sober is really a story of redemption, of somebody who's willing to change, makes the change, and lives, ostensibly a happy life afterwards. And that's something that I think that the message of this film really conveys beautifully. Jason, I want to thank you so much for hanging out with us on Recovery on Screen and giving us your point of view on the film, and how great you actually own the film, on DVD. That's classic. That's pretty amazing. You want anything else to tell our audience before we split?
Oh, Ted, no, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to come to know you now. I have a feeling we've got a lot of work to do together, just your passion and just, your passion for film as well. I mean, you've been in the industry so long, and, it's something probably secondary to sobriety and recovery, one of my biggest passions. So just a real big honor. And hey, please check out that episode with Ted coming up on Knocking Doors Down. Go to kddpodcast.com. Ted and I have a great talk. It was such an honor to learn so much more about you and all that you're doing, and just amazing work too. So it's just it always lifts me up to see so many people trying to do so good with their hard times and help others.
Well, awesome. All right. So all of you watching Recovery on Screen, I'll put the information about the podcast in the description, and also I'll put the link, right under you. I'll edit that in later. I just did. You saw it. But Jason, thanks for joining us. And for all of you in the Addicted in Film Movie Club and the Recovery on Screen film series, both of you are going to watch this episode. Hopefully enjoy it. Enjoy the film Clean and Sober. And look at Michael Keaton at his best, and use it and see what you can get out of this film, because it does have a very unique and very necessary perspective about addiction recovery. For all of you, thank you so much, and we'll see you in our next episode of Recovery on Screen.